Public-private partnerships is something that the Chamber is very supportive of. It's been one of our biggest pushes. But in this campaign, you've said that you're not a fan of P3s, and you've also stated that if this government doesn't have the money for a project, then we shouldn't be doing it. Obviously, public-private partnerships can be a way to cut down on costs. So what is your opposition exactly to P3?
Again, there's been a lot of miscommunication as to what I've actually said, and that's intentional, I think, on the part of some. Some truly don't understand it, so they'll take something I say and misconstrue it accidentally. Others have done it very intentionally. I'm not opposed to P3s across the board. I'm very opposed to the idea of spending money today that we can't afford to spend. And so, especially on critical infrastructure projects. When it first came up and when people took what I said and ran with it, it was very specific to the Brent Spence Bridge project in northern Kentucky. I'm not a proponent of using P3s for that because that will come back on the taxpayer. It will come back as a toll on those roads because the middle P in the public-private partnership expects a fourth P, and that is a profit. And I don't blame them. They should be looking for a profit. So there are some venues, whether it's a sporting venue, whether it's broadband. We have an exciting opportunity right now in the state with the largest P3 provider, participant in the world, an Australian company who is doing a lot of good work with Hal Rogers and others to try to bring that in. That could work very well. And what I've seen thus far, I generally like. I really do. That is a good use of potential P3 dollars. Using it on infrastructure that involves interstate commerce where the recourse is to go back in the form of tolls and or taxes and or when the legislation is written in a way that allows the middle P, the private part, to not only get a guaranteed rate of return, but additionally to be able to preclude other projects from being put in place that the state might need until they've been paid back. That's where I have concern with it. So again, it is not a one-size-fits-all. It is like early childhood education. You can't just put a blanket statement over something. As it relates to P3, be thoughtful and smart about whether the taxpayer is going to get a good return. And if private investors want to invest in in student housing, for example, by all means. That's frankly a brilliant solution because there you're going to get things built in a timely manner and the ROI on that is almost obvious from the moment you start breaking ground. That's where it should be used, not on critical infrastructure projects that involve interstate commerce.
Now, with the Brent Spence Bridge, obviously a lot of people have talked about being opposed to tolls. Do you think it's the role of the federal government to pay for this bridge? Obviously, it looks like they're not going to. So how do we build it otherwise?
There's $18.5 trillion and growing of federal debt, and that's not even the unfunded liabilities. The federal government's more broke than we are. They just have the luxury of being able to print money. We don't. But that's not the successful solution, is to borrow from the future. How's it going to be done? The federal government, the days of them coming in and handling it, even though arguably it is their domain, it's interstate commerce, 4% of the GDP of the nation rolls across the Brent Spence Bridge every year. 7% if you look at the bridges around it. That is a key corridor for the movement of goods in America. That is arguably the exact domain of the federal government and of interstate commerce and of those few enumerated powers that are their responsibility. But they're broke. So how do we do it? If we in Kentucky and Ohio, who are on each side of this problem and this opportunity, as you might see it, if we each step up in a specific and committed way, and let's say it's a $3 billion project, and I'm not convinced that even the 2.6 is accurate, it could conceivably be less, but let's say by the time we get around to doing something, it's $3 billion. If we say we're in for $1 billion, and Ohio's in for $1 billion, I truly believe we could get the federal government to step up for it, because there is good precedent for, in good faith, states coming forward and the federal government coming alongside. It's critical to the nation that that be addressed. But again, it's not a given that we just simply need to build a new bridge, because all we may be doing is pushing the bottleneck by widening it a bit 7 miles south. So there are other thoughtful ideas that are being put in place, including alternative routes that frankly are much more forward-thinking. And I think we would be wise to study them very carefully before we spend any money anywhere. Where do we get the $1 billion? That's the question. You know, right now we still get $600, $700, $800 million a year. Goes up and down. It's about $700 million a year from the federal highway trust funds. The Congress just passed a 5-month, reinfusement of money. They'll continue to. It's like mortgage interest. It's not going away anytime soon. It's a political hot potato for anybody to mess with. So Congress will continue to fund it and we'll continue to get a piece of it. There are things called Garvey bonds. Garvey bonds were specifically designed for states and other entities to be able to use these bonds, borrowing from federal dollars that are coming, including in this instance. So if we get $700 million a year, let's take $150 million a year, or whatever the number happens to be, and bond this over the course of however many years are needed, 7, 8, 10 years, to pay for our portion of that $1 billion. We're going to allocate 15% of our annual income from the federal trust fund, but we know we're going to, 10 years down the road or less, have fixed this problem. And those bonds will be paid back out of the proceeds of those dollars. That's what they're there for. That's what we should do. That's what I'm calling for.